He turned away when he saw the positive test. But 5 years later, on a yacht under the blazing sun, he saw the boy, and knew everything had changed. Liam Weston was the kind of man who lived by rules carved out of steel. Every moment of his life was scheduled, every decision calculated, every emotion locked behind the armor of logic and discipline. He was the CEO of Weston Dynamics, a multinational empire that had grown from a small tech firm into a corporate titan under his leadership. People feared him, admired him, envied him, but no one really knew him. He had built his empire with precision, making sure there were no cracks, no weaknesses, nothing that could make him vulnerable. At least, that was true until Emma Brown walked into his world. Emma wasn't like the people who surrounded him every day. She didn't speak in strategy or profit margins, she spoke about ideas, about colors, about life. She was a designer in one of the company's creative divisions, brilliant, independent, and completely unafraid to speak her mind. She had no idea who he was when they first met at an internal presentation. She stood in front of a room full of executives, passionately explaining a concept for a new campaign, her voice steady, her hands animated, her blue eyes alive with conviction. Liam had been sitting in the back, ready to dismiss yet another round of corporate creativity, but when she spoke, he couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about her, a warmth that cut through the cold efficiency of his world. Over the weeks that followed, their paths began to cross more often. He found excuses to check on her department, to ask her opinions on things he didn't need opinions on. She didn't treat him like everyone else did, she didn't flatter him or try to impress him. When she disagreed, she said so directly, and instead of being offended, he found himself intrigued. For the first time in years, someone made him laugh, really laugh. He tried to tell himself it was nothing, just curiosity, but it was more than that. Emma represented something he didn't even know he was missing: honesty, warmth, humanity. What started as professional admiration slowly turned into something deeper. Late nights at the office turned into conversations that stretched for hours, about everything from art to childhood memories to the parts of themselves they never showed anyone. She began to see the man behind the polished image, the one who carried the weight of an empire but had no one to share it with. And he began to see her not just as an employee, but as a light that could warm even the darkest parts of him. They tried to fight it, knowing how wrong it was, but love has a way of slipping through the cracks no matter how tightly one guards the walls. When they finally gave in, it wasn't dramatic or planned. It happened one evening when they were both working late, the city lights glittering through the glass windows. She had been laughing about something small, something ordinary, and suddenly he couldn't stop looking at her. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and for a moment, everything, the company, the consequences, the fear, fell away. When he kissed her, it wasn't the confident act of a man used to control, it was hesitant, desperate, almost reverent. That night marked the beginning of something fragile and real. For months, they lived in their own secret world. They spent weekends out of the city, cooking together in small rented houses by the lake, pretending that they were ordinary people. Emma brought out a version of Liam no one else knew existed, the man who could smile without calculating, who could love without restraint. But for Liam, love was also terrifying. He had built his life on stability and order, and Emma was everything unpredictable. She made him feel, and that made him weak. At least, that's what he told himself. The first signs of trouble came quietly. A few rumors in the company. A few questions from his board about where his focus had gone. And then, one night, Emma showed up at his apartment looking pale and nervous. He opened the door, half smiling, half worried, but when he saw the small white stick trembling in her hand, his blood ran cold. 2 pink lines. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She looked at him with wide, tearful eyes, her voice shaking as she said, "I'm pregnant." Liam felt the world tilt. The air seemed to thicken. He should have felt something, joy, surprise, anything, but what he felt was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of chaos, fear of everything he had worked for falling apart. His mind filled with headlines, scandal, board meetings, shareholders asking questions. His heart pounded, but not for the right reasons. Emma reached for him, her eyes searching his face for reassurance, for love, for anything, but what she saw instead was panic. He turned away from her, unable to look. "Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking, "say something." But all he could manage was a whisper that came out like a knife. "You're going to ruin everything." She flinched as if he'd struck her, tears filling her eyes. "Ruin what? Your perfect image? Your reputation? This isn't just about you, Liam. This is our child." He didn't answer. He couldn't. The words stuck in his throat, choking him with shame he refused to feel. When she realized he wasn't going to say what she needed to hear, something inside her shattered. She straightened, wiping her tears, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. "I thought I knew who you were. I thought you were brave enough to love something real." He still didn't turn around. He heard the sound of the door opening, then closing, and then silence. For a long time, he just stood there, staring at nothing, his reflection ghostly in the window. The city stretched out before him, glittering and cold, but all he could see was her face, the pain in her eyes, and the truth he couldn't admit: he was terrified not of losing control, but of losing her. That night, Liam Weston poured himself a drink, then another, and another, trying to drown out the echo of her voice. The next morning, when he woke up, she was gone, not just from his apartment, but from his life. She didn't call, didn't write, didn't leave a trace. He told himself it was for the best, that she'd move on, that he'd done the right thing. But in the quiet hours of the night, when he sat alone in his glass-walled office overlooking the city, the memory of her laugh haunted him. Months turned into years, and he told himself he was fine. He worked harder, earned more, built higher walls. But sometimes, in the middle of a meeting, he'd catch himself wondering what might have been. What their child might have looked like. What kind of father he could have been if he'd been brave instead of proud. And though he would never say it aloud, in the silence of his own mind, he knew the truth: he had gained everything the world could offer, but lost the only thing that ever truly mattered. He didn't know it yet, but fate had not finished with him. Somewhere, far away, the woman he had pushed aside was raising a little boy who had his dark hair, his piercing blue eyes, and the same stubborn streak that once made her fall in love with him. And in 5 years' time, the storm he had tried to escape would return to him, not to destroy him, but to show him what real love truly costs, and what it can still save. 5 years can erase a lot of things: addresses, phone numbers, faces, but it cannot erase regret. For Emma, time became both her enemy and her teacher. The first months after leaving Liam had been the hardest of her life. She had nothing but a suitcase, a handful of savings, and a child growing inside her. She moved to a small coastal town far from the city's noise and from the man whose silence had broken her heart. She found a job at a small design studio, doing freelance work at night while her belly grew rounder and heavier. When loneliness threatened to crush her, she reminded herself that she wasn't alone. Inside her was a life she had created, a piece of love that still belonged to her no matter what he had said. The day Noah was born was both terrifying and miraculous. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and rain, and as the storm howled outside, she held onto the bed rail, her breath shallow, sweat dripping down her forehead. It was a long labor, painful and exhausting, but when she heard that first cry, everything stopped. They placed him in her arms, a tiny, wrinkled boy with a shock of dark hair and the bluest eyes she had ever seen, and she felt something inside her shift forever. He was her redemption, her reason, her future. In that moment, the hurt Liam had caused seemed distant, almost meaningless. What mattered was the fragile heartbeat pressed against her chest and the warmth of that small hand gripping her finger. Raising Noah on her own wasn't easy. There were days when the exhaustion was so deep she thought she would collapse, nights when she stayed up worrying about bills or fevers or the unknown future. But there was also laughter, so much laughter. Noah was curious and bright, full of energy, full of light. He loved the ocean, loved to run barefoot through the sand and chase the waves as if he could catch them. Sometimes Emma would sit on the beach watching him, her hair whipped by the wind, and she would think about how much he looked like his father, the same determined jaw, the same blue eyes that could see right through her. But unlike Liam's, Noah's gaze held no coldness, no calculation. His eyes were full of wonder. As the years passed, Emma slowly rebuilt her life. She opened her own small design business from home, working while Noah played beside her with crayons and blocks. Clients came by word of mouth, impressed by her talent and quiet professionalism. For the first time in a long while, she felt stable. There was still an ache in her chest that surfaced sometimes, usually late at night when the world was silent and memories crept in, but she learned how to live with it. She stopped checking the news to see his face, stopped wondering if he ever thought of her. She told herself that he had moved on, that men like Liam Weston didn't look back. But fate has a way of folding paths back together when we least expect it. It began on a morning that was supposed to be ordinary. Emma's best friend, Laura, had invited her and Noah on a week-long yacht trip through the Mediterranean. "You need a break," Laura had said, handing her the tickets. "You've worked yourself to death for 5 years. Let the ocean clear your head." At first Emma refused, but Noah's excitement changed her mind. He had never seen the open sea. She packed their bags, bought him a little blue raincoat and a pair of sailor shoes, and told herself this trip would be nothing more than a memory for him, a happy one. The yacht was beautiful, gleaming under the sun like something out of a dream. For the first 2 days, Emma allowed herself to relax. Noah made friends with the crew, running around the deck and laughing, his curls catching the light. At night, he fell asleep to the sound of waves while Emma sat on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon. The sea had always comforted her. It was vast and unpredictable, but it was also forgiving. It could take everything from you and still make you whole again. On the morning of the 3rd day, the weather changed. The sun disappeared behind clouds, and the air grew heavy with the smell of rain. Emma and Noah went ashore when the yacht stopped at a marina on the French coast. They walked along the boardwalk, holding hands, laughing as the first drops began to fall. She bought him an ice cream cone and watched as he tried to eat it before the rain melted it away. It was such a simple, beautiful moment that she didn't notice the man on the yacht across the dock watching her. Liam Weston had not planned to be there. He was supposed to be in meetings in Monaco, but a last-minute change in schedule had brought him to that harbor. He stood on the deck of his own yacht, the world's noise humming in the background, feeling as empty as ever. For years, he had told himself he had made the right choice, that his company's success, his spotless image, his carefully crafted life had all been worth the sacrifice. But lately, that conviction had begun to crumble. He woke up at night from dreams he couldn't explain, always the same, blue eyes looking at him through tears, a voice whispering his name, and a sense of something missing that he couldn't fix. When his eyes found her on the dock that morning, time stopped. She was standing under the gray sky, laughing as she tried to shield a small boy from the rain. Her hair was longer now, her body more graceful, her movements softer. But it was her eyes that hit him like a blow, those same blue eyes he had tried to forget. His breath caught in his throat, his fingers tightening on the railing. And then he saw the boy. The child turned toward him, his dark curls damp from the drizzle, his cheeks flushed from laughter. The resemblance was instant, undeniable, merciless. Liam felt the world tilt beneath his feet. He knew that face. He had seen it every morning in the mirror. The boy had his hair, his eyes, even his small, crooked smile. In that single instant, 5 years of denial shattered. The glass cage of his control splintered, and for the first time in years, he felt something real: shock, guilt, fear, awe, all at once. Emma didn't see him right away. She was kneeling, fixing Noah's coat, when the boy suddenly looked past her and waved. "Mom," he said, "that man's looking at us." She turned, following his gaze, and when her eyes met Liam's, her heart stopped. For a second, she couldn't breathe. The rain blurred everything, but not enough to hide him. He was standing there, tall, composed, the same but not the same. His hair was darker now, his face sharper, and yet the sight of him brought back every memory she had fought to bury. She froze. He didn't move either. The world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the sound of rain on the docks and the steady pounding of her heart. 5 years of pain, anger, and silence collapsed into that one impossible moment. Then, without a word, she took Noah's hand and turned away. But as she walked, her legs trembled, her breath shaking. She could feel his gaze on her back, burning like a truth she couldn't escape. Liam watched her go, unable to move, unable to speak. The boy looked back one last time, his blue eyes curious and innocent, and Liam felt something tear inside him. He realized, with a clarity that left him breathless, that this was not the end of their story. Fate had brought her back into his sight for a reason. He had spent 5 years running from the past, but now the past had a face, a small boy's face, and it was looking straight at him. That night, long after the rain had stopped and the harbor lights flickered against the dark water, Liam stood alone on the deck, staring at the spot where he had last seen her. The ache in his chest was unbearable. He didn't know what he would say if he saw her again, or if she would even listen, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he could no longer pretend he wasn't the man who had walked away from the best thing that ever happened to him. And tomorrow, he would find her. No matter what it took. Liam didn't sleep that night. The sound of the waves outside his cabin felt louder than usual, crashing against the sides of the yacht like his own thoughts. He poured himself a drink, but it only burned his throat and did nothing to silence the storm inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business, profits, or mergers. He was thinking about her, the way Emma's face had looked in the rain, the shock and pain that had flickered in her eyes when she saw him, and the little boy whose blue gaze had pierced straight through every wall he had built around himself. There was no doubt in his mind anymore. That child was his. No explanation, no DNA test, no denial could erase what he had seen. By dawn, he was pacing the deck, restless and uncertain. He had faced down competitors, journalists, and hostile boardrooms without hesitation, but now he felt like a man stripped of armor. What could he even say to her? "I'm sorry." Those words felt pitiful and empty compared to the years she had spent alone. He remembered how she'd looked the night she told him about the pregnancy, terrified, hopeful, desperate for him to stand beside her. And he had turned away. He had chosen fear over love, pride over honesty. He had convinced himself it was the right decision, that she'd be fine, that he was protecting his life from scandal. But now, standing under the same gray sky where he had seen her again, all his rationalizations crumbled into dust. He hadn't protected anything. He had simply destroyed the one thing that ever mattered. He asked around the marina, discreetly, pretending it was business curiosity, but every question he asked led him closer to her. A crew member from another yacht mentioned a woman traveling with a small boy and a friend. Someone else said they were staying at a nearby boutique hotel overlooking the harbor. He hesitated before going there. What if she refused to see him? What if she slammed the door in his face? He almost convinced himself to leave, to let her live her life, to spare her the pain of reopening old wounds. But then he thought of the boy, of Noah, and realized that whatever she felt for him, he had a son who didn't even know he existed. He couldn't walk away from that. Not again. When he finally found the hotel, it was mid-morning. The lobby was small and sunlit, filled with the smell of coffee and sea air. He spotted her instantly through the glass doors of the adjoining cafe. She was sitting by the window, her hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes focused on the small boy across from her, who was holding a cup of hot chocolate with both hands, giggling as the whipped cream stuck to his nose. The sight made Liam's chest ache. She looked peaceful, radiant even, and he realized how long it had been since he had seen her smile. For a moment, he just stood there, unable to move, afraid that if he took a step, the moment would shatter. Then, as if sensing him, Emma looked up. Her smile faded, her body tensed, and her eyes met his with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He took a breath, pushed the door open, and walked toward her. The noise of the cafe seemed to fade as he approached. She didn't speak. Her hand instinctively moved to Noah's shoulder, protective, steady. Liam stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to do with his hands, his voice, his guilt. "Emma," he said softly, the name tasting both foreign and familiar. She didn't answer. Her lips pressed into a thin line. He tried again. "Please. I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, her tone cold but quiet, so as not to alarm the child. "You've already said everything you needed to say 5 years ago." Liam flinched at the words. "I know," he said quickly. "I know I don't deserve even a minute of your time. But I need to explain. I need to see him." Her jaw tightened. "You don't get to ask for that. You don't get to just show up and demand something after vanishing for years. You made your choice, Liam. You turned your back on us before he was even born." Noah, sensing the tension, looked up at his mother and then at Liam, his small brow furrowing. "Mommy, who is that man?" he asked in his small, curious voice. The question hit Liam like a physical blow. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat closed. Emma's eyes softened for a second as she looked at her son, but when she turned back to Liam, they were ice again. "Just someone I used to know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Then she stood, took Noah's hand, and turned away. Liam wanted to stop her, to grab her hand, to beg for a second chance, but he knew he didn't have the right. He watched her walk away again, just as he had all those years ago, but this time, he couldn't let it end like that. He followed her outside, keeping a careful distance so as not to scare her. The rain had started again, light but persistent, beating on the gray cobblestones of the street. When she finally stopped, turning sharply to face him, he saw anger and pain in her eyes, but also exhaustion. She was tired of fighting ghosts. "What do you want, Liam?" she asked. "Closure? Forgiveness? You think you can just appear and make things right?" "No," he said quietly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to make things different now. I didn't come here to take him away from you. I came because I need to take responsibility for what I did." Emma shook her head, tears welling in her eyes despite her efforts to hide them. "You can't rewrite the past. You can't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep or the years I raised him alone. I know, he said again, his voice breaking. But I can be here now. For both of you. If you let me. For a long time, she said nothing. The rain dripped from the edge of her coat, the street around them silent except for the distant murmur of the sea. He didn't move, didn't dare. Finally, she sighed, her voice softer but full of caution. I don't know if I can believe you, Liam. You always chose control over love. And people don't change that easily. You're right, he admitted. I didn't change because I wanted to. I changed because living without you, without him, made me realize what kind of man I'd become. And I hated that man. Emma looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned away and walked toward the hotel. But this time, she didn't tell him not to follow. That small silence, that absence of rejection, was enough to ignite a flicker of hope inside him. For the first time since he had lost her, Liam Weston allowed himself to believe that redemption might not be impossible. He watched her disappear through the glass doors, her hand still holding Noah's, and promised himself silently that he would not fail them again. That night, back on his yacht, he sat by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked horizon. He could still see her face every time he closed his eyes, the defiance, the pain, the strength. And he thought of the boy's eyes, so full of innocence, and realized that this time, he couldn't afford to run. If he had to prove to her every single day that he was no longer the man who had walked away, he would. Because for the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting for success or control. He was fighting for love, and for the chance to be the father his son deserved. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn, her mind tangled with memories she wished she could silence. She hadn't truly slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's face, his eyes wide and unguarded for the first time in years, his voice trembling when he said he wanted to make things right. She hated how those words had pierced her, how some small part of her still wanted to believe him. For years she had imagined what she would say if she ever saw him again, angry speeches, cruel truths, the satisfaction of watching him feel what she had felt. But when he had stood in front of her, soaked from the rain, looking lost and broken, the anger she expected didn't come the way she thought it would. Instead, there was confusion, a deep ache that frightened her. Downstairs, the hotel was quiet. Noah was still asleep, curled beneath the white sheets, his small hand resting beside his cheek. She watched him for a long moment, her heart tightening with both love and fear. He was everything to her. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, he was the reason she had survived. And now, the man who had caused all that pain had reappeared, stirring a part of her heart she thought had died. She brushed a curl from Noah's forehead and whispered, "You're my whole world," before quietly leaving the room to get some air. Outside, the early light broke gently over the sea, turning the water into silver glass. The marina was still half asleep, the faint clinking of sails and the scent of salt heavy in the cool air. She walked along the dock, pulling her coat tighter around her, trying to clear her mind. But as she reached the end of the pier, she saw him again. Liam stood by the railing of his yacht, coffee in hand, staring at the horizon. He turned slightly at the sound of her footsteps, surprise flickering across his face, quickly replaced by something softer, something almost like hope. For a moment, neither spoke. The distance between them was only a few feet, but it felt like an ocean. Emma kept her arms crossed, her voice calm but guarded. "Following me now?" He shook his head. "No. Just couldn't sleep." He paused, studying her expression. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again." "You weren't supposed to," she replied, her tone sharp, though not as cutting as she wanted it to be. She hesitated, then sighed. Why are you really here, Liam? You don't chase people. You don't do spontaneous. So why now? Liam set his cup down on the railing and looked at her, really looked, as if trying to memorize every detail. Because I made the worst mistake of my life, and I can't live with it anymore. I told myself for years that walking away was the right thing, that I was protecting my life, my company, my future. But the truth is, I was protecting my fear. I was terrified of losing control, of loving someone so much that they could destroy me. And in the process, I destroyed you. Emma blinked, the confession catching her off guard. The man she once knew never admitted weakness, never confessed regret. Hearing him speak so honestly made something twist painfully inside her. Do you think words are enough to fix what happened? She asked quietly. Do you think one apology can erase 5 years of absence? No, he said simply. I don't expect it to. I just need to start somewhere. I need to do something other than regret. He ran a hand through his hair, his voice low but steady. I see him, Emma. I see my son. And I know I don't deserve to even say those words, but it's the truth. When I looked at him yesterday, I saw everything I threw away. I can't walk away again. I won't. Emma turned her gaze toward the sea, her eyes stinging. You don't get to just appear and call him your son. You weren't there for his first words, his first steps, his fevers, the nights he cried until morning. You don't know what it's like to hold him and wonder how you'll feed him the next day. You don't know what it cost me to do this alone. Liam's jaw clenched, and he stepped closer, his voice breaking. Then tell me. Let me know. Let me understand what I missed so I'll never forget what I owe you both. She shook her head, half angry, half heartbroken. You can't understand that kind of pain by hearing it, Liam. You feel it by living it. And you didn't. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist gently, not to stop her, but to make her listen. His touch was light, trembling. You're right, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't live it. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. I know I can't fix the past, but maybe, if you let me, I can help shape the future. Emma pulled her hand free, but she didn't walk away. She stood there, staring at the water, fighting back tears she didn't want him to see. She wanted to hate him, it would have been easier. But the man standing before her wasn't the same cold executive who had once turned his back on her. There was something human in him now, something vulnerable, something she had never thought she'd see again. After a long silence, she said quietly, if you really want to be in his life, it won't be easy. You can't just show up when it's convenient. You'll have to prove it, every day. I will, he said instantly, his voice filled with conviction. Whatever it takes. She turned to face him again, her expression unreadable. Fine, she said after a moment. We'll see what you're capable of, Liam Weston. Then she walked away, her footsteps echoing against the wet dock, leaving him standing there with the faintest spark of hope flickering inside him. That afternoon, he saw her again at the Marina Cafe. She was with Noah, helping him color pictures on a napkin while they waited for food. Liam kept his distance at first, sitting at another table, but when Noah accidentally dropped his crayons, Liam was the one who bent down to pick them up. The boy looked up at him and smiled. Thanks, mister, he said, his blue eyes bright. Liam smiled back, his throat tight. You're welcome. It was a simple exchange, just a few seconds, but it meant more than any deal Liam had ever closed. Emma watched quietly, her expression conflicted. She could see the gentleness in Liam's movements, the way his eyes softened when he looked at the boy, and it unnerved her. She didn't know if she could trust him again, but she couldn't deny what she saw. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, she sat by the window and stared at the lights flickering across the harbor. Against her will, memories of the past crept in, his laughter, his warmth, the way he used to look at her when she didn't even realize he was watching. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the old ache rise again, not from love that had died, but from love that had survived despite everything. Across the water, on his yacht, Liam couldn't stop thinking about the way Noah had smiled at him. It was small, innocent, unaware, but it had given him something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. For the first time, he didn't want power or perfection. He wanted to be a man his son could one day be proud of. He knew it would take time, patience, and a kind of humility he had never practiced before. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't going to walk away again. Not from Emma, and not from the little boy with his blue eyes and his mother's courage. The sea outside was calm, the night air cool, and as Liam leaned against the railing, he whispered to himself, "This time, I'll fight for them." And for the first time in his life, he meant it. Over the next several days, Liam began to appear wherever Emma and Noah happened to be. It wasn't intentional at first, at least, that's what he told himself, but the truth was, he couldn't stay away. Every morning, he found a reason to walk through the same market or stop at the same cafe, always keeping a respectful distance, never pushing too far. He wanted to be near them, to watch from the edges of their world without forcing his way in. It was strange for him, this new kind of patience. He had built his empire on control and persistence, on taking what he wanted when he wanted it. But this was different. This time, he had to wait. He had to earn every small glance, every fragile moment of trust. Emma noticed, of course. She always did. She'd see him at the bakery buying coffee, pretending to read a newspaper, or standing near the docks watching the boats with a distant look that told her he wasn't there for the view. At first, it irritated her. She told herself he was only doing it out of guilt, that it wouldn't last, that he'd get bored and disappear again once the weight of effort set in. But as the days went by, his presence began to feel less like intrusion and more like something familiar, a shadow she couldn't quite chase away, no matter how hard she tried. One morning, she and Noah were walking through the local market, the smell of fresh bread and rain lingering in the air. Noah ran ahead, laughing as he darted between stalls, his curls bouncing. Emma's heart swelled with affection, but when she turned to call him back, she saw that Liam had already stepped forward, stopping the boy just before he could trip over a basket of oranges. He bent down, steadying him with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Careful there, champ," he said softly. Noah grinned up at him. "Thanks. I was running fast." Liam chuckled, his voice warm. "Yeah, I could tell. But fast runners still have to watch where they're going." Emma approached, her heart thudding, unsure whether to be angry or grateful. "You didn't have to," she began, but he interrupted her quietly. "I know. But I wanted to." There was no arrogance in his tone, none of the pride she remembered. Only sincerity. For a long moment, they stood there, watching Noah examine a small toy he had found at one of the stalls. Then Emma said, "He likes you. He doesn't even know who you are." Liam's eyes softened as he looked at the boy. "Maybe that's why," he said. "He sees me without the past." That night, after putting Noah to bed, Emma sat alone on the small balcony of her hotel room, staring at the ocean. She tried to convince herself that she was being foolish, that letting Liam near her son would only end in heartbreak. But deep down, she knew that what she was feeling wasn't foolish, it was dangerous. Because for all her anger, there was still something in her that wanted to believe in him. She had spent 5 years building walls around her heart, and now, with just a few quiet gestures, he was finding ways through the cracks. Liam, meanwhile, had made a decision. He wasn't leaving the harbor. His company could survive without him for a while, his board could handle the meetings, and his world could keep spinning without his constant control. For once, he didn't care about being the man everyone else needed him to be. The only thing that mattered was the woman he had broken and the child who didn't know his name. Every evening, he found himself watching them from afar, memorizing the rhythm of their life, the way Emma tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way Noah laughed so hard his whole body shook. He wanted to be a part of it, but not as an intruder. He wanted to earn his way in. One afternoon, as the clouds gathered over the sea, he found Emma sitting at a small outdoor cafe, sketching designs in her notebook while Noah colored beside her. He approached slowly, his steps uncertain. "Do you mind if I sit?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. For a while, they sat in silence, the sound of the waves and the soft scratching of pencils filling the space between them. Then Liam said quietly, "He's amazing." Emma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "He is," she said. "He's everything." "I can see that," Liam said, his gaze fixed on Noah. "You've done an incredible job with him." Emma looked away, her throat tightening. "I didn't have a choice." He nodded. "I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness for not being there. I just want the chance to be here now." Her hand stilled on the page. "You think it's that simple?" "No," he said softly. "But it's a start." The sky darkened, and rain began to fall, gentle at first, then heavier. People rushed for cover, but Emma didn't move. She sat there, watching the rain, her expression distant. Liam took off his jacket and held it above her, shielding her and Noah from the downpour. She looked up at him, startled, their faces suddenly close, the air between them thick with the weight of everything unspoken. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I should have done it a long time ago," he replied. Something inside her broke then, not completely, not enough to forgive, but enough to let her heart feel again. She saw the truth in his eyes, the kind of truth that can't be faked. For a long time, they just sat there, the rain falling around them, their silence saying everything neither could. Over the next week, things began to shift in quiet, almost invisible ways. Liam started spending more time with Noah, reading to him, teaching him to tie knots on the dock, showing him how to skip stones across the water. The boy took to him easily, as if sensing that this man was someone who belonged in his small, simple world. Emma watched cautiously, her heart torn between fear and hope. Every time Liam smiled at Noah, something in her softened despite herself. One evening, she found them sitting together on the beach, building a small fortress of sand. Noah was laughing, his hands covered in wet sand, while Liam helped shape the walls with surprising patience. "We're building the biggest castle ever," Noah shouted. Liam laughed, glancing up at her as she approached. "He's the architect," he said with a grin. "I'm just the labor." Emma knelt beside them, her hands brushing against the wet sand. "Looks like you're doing fine," she said quietly. Liam's smile faded a little as he looked at her. "It's easy when you have something worth building for." Her breath caught at the weight of his words, but she said nothing. They stayed there until the sky turned orange with the setting sun, the waves whispering against the shore. For the first time in years, Emma didn't feel like she was waiting for something to end. She felt like something was beginning. That night, as she lay in bed listening to Noah's soft breathing, she realized she was no longer haunted by anger. The pain was still there, yes, but it had changed shape. It was quieter now, tempered by something fragile and unfamiliar: hope. She didn't know if Liam would stay, or if this peace would last, but she wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Across the harbor, on his yacht, Liam stood by the window, watching the lights from the town shimmer on the water. He thought about Emma's cautious smile, about Noah's laughter, about the warmth that had begun to return to his heart. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the past or the future, he was simply grateful for the present. And though he knew there was still a long way to go, he whispered to himself with quiet conviction, "I'm not running anymore." The days that followed carried a strange stillness, like the calm before a storm that neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Emma had grown used to seeing Liam now, though she told herself she was only allowing it for Noah's sake. He had become a quiet constant in their small world, appearing with a kind of patience that both unnerved and softened her. Every morning, he would bring Noah breakfast from the bakery down the street, always remembering exactly what the boy liked: chocolate croissants and orange juice. He would wait outside the cafe where Emma worked, sometimes helping her carry supplies or running errands for her small business without being asked. She tried to tell him to stop, to keep his distance, but she could never quite find the right words. It wasn't because she had forgiven him, but because every time she saw the way Noah's eyes lit up when Liam arrived, she couldn't bring herself to take that happiness away from her son. For Liam, these small moments became his salvation. The life he had once lived felt foreign now: board meetings, luxury dinners, endless negotiations. He still took calls and handled work from his yacht, but it no longer consumed him. What mattered now was something far simpler and infinitely harder to earn. Every smile from Noah, every cautious glance from Emma, felt like progress. He had never known that love could be built through silence, through presence, through simply being there when it mattered. He found himself learning things he had never understood before: how to listen instead of speak, how to wait instead of command, how to let someone else lead without losing himself. One afternoon, Emma invited him to join them for lunch. It wasn't a grand gesture, and she didn't look at him when she asked, but Liam understood what it meant. They sat together on the patio of a small restaurant overlooking the sea, Noah between them, chattering about everything and nothing. The boy told stories about the crabs he had found near the rocks and the sandcastle that had collapsed because of a giant wave that was totally unfair. Liam listened with genuine fascination, laughing softly when Noah exaggerated. Every once in a while, his eyes would drift to Emma, who was quietly watching her son, and he would catch himself wondering how he had ever let this go. After lunch, they walked along the pier. The wind had picked up, tossing Emma's hair across her face. Without thinking, Liam reached out to brush it away, but stopped midway, his hand hovering for a second before he let it fall back to his side. She noticed, and something inside her twisted. It wasn't that she didn't want him to touch her, it was that she didn't know if she could handle it. The memories of the past were still too sharp, and she was afraid of letting him close enough to cut her again. That evening, when they parted, she surprised herself by saying, "Thank you for today." It was a small thing, but Liam felt it like a shock. He wanted to tell her how much it meant, but he only nodded, afraid that too many words might break the fragile truce forming between them. That night, however, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the sound of waves drifting through the open window. She thought about Liam, the way he laughed with Noah, the quiet sincerity in his eyes, the way he seemed genuinely changed. She had always imagined that if he ever came back, she would never trust him again. But now, she wasn't so sure. There was a vulnerability in him that hadn't existed before, a humility that made her chest ache. Yet with that ache came fear. People didn't change overnight, and love had cost her too much once already. Across the harbor, Liam sat on the deck of his yacht, looking out at the moonlit sea. He had been thinking about Emma all evening, about how she had thanked him, about the way she had smiled, softly, almost reluctantly, as though she was afraid of what it might mean. He wanted to hold her, to tell her that he would never leave again, but he knew that words were cheap. He had spoken too many of them before and followed too few with action. This time, he would let time speak for him. He closed his eyes and imagined what it might be like to wake up with her beside him, to watch Noah grow, to be a part of something real for once in his life. The next morning, Liam joined them on a trip to a nearby island. It was Emma's idea, or at least, she didn't object when Noah begged for it and Liam offered to arrange it. The boat ride was long and gentle, the sea calm and blue beneath the sun. Noah sat between them, pointing at dolphins in the distance and asking endless questions. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in years, and though she tried not to, she caught herself glancing at Liam when she did. He wasn't the same man she remembered. There was still power in him, the same quiet command that had once drawn her in, but now it was tempered with something softer. He was attentive, patient, kind. When they arrived at the island, they spent the day exploring the beach. Noah collected shells while Emma and Liam walked slowly along the shoreline, the waves brushing their feet. At one point, she stopped to tie her sandal, and Liam crouched beside her, his hand brushing hers as he helped. The contact was brief but electric. She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Neither spoke, but everything that needed to be said hung between them in the space of that glance. Later, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, they sat together on a blanket while Noah slept beside them, exhausted from the day. The air was cool, the sound of the ocean rhythmic and calm. Emma hugged her knees to her chest, watching the waves turn gold and crimson. "You've changed," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. Liam didn't answer right away. He looked out at the sea, his profile sharp against the fading light. "I had to," he said after a long pause. "Losing you was the only thing that ever made me realize what I really was, a man too afraid to love, too proud to admit he was wrong. I spent years building walls around myself, and all they did was keep out everything that mattered." Emma's eyes glistened in the dim light. "And now?" He turned to her, his gaze steady but gentle. "Now I'm trying to tear them down, one by one." The wind carried their silence for a while. Emma wanted to believe him. Every part of her wanted to. But belief was a dangerous thing. It had betrayed her once before. Still, sitting there beside him, watching the way he looked at their son, the way he spoke without arrogance or expectation, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. When they returned to the mainland, the stars were already out. Noah slept in Liam's arms as they walked back to the hotel. Emma unlocked the door to her room, then turned to face him. For a moment, they simply stood there, the hallway bathed in the soft glow of the lights. "Good night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Emma," he replied, his eyes lingering on her face as if memorizing it. She closed the door, leaning against it for a moment, her heart pounding. On the other side, Liam stood motionless, listening to the quiet. He wanted to knock again, to say more, to ask if there was a chance for them to start over. But he didn't. Not yet. For the first time in his life, he understood that love wasn't something you demanded, it was something you proved, one day at a time. That night, Emma dreamed of the ocean, of the sound of laughter, and of Liam's voice calling her name, not in anger, not in fear, but in hope. When she woke, her heart was still racing, and for the first time in 5 years, she didn't push the feeling away. The following weeks passed in a rhythm so fragile that Emma was afraid to breathe too deeply, as if one wrong move could shatter it. Liam had become part of their days now, not by force, not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. He was there every morning, helping Noah get ready, sometimes walking him to the little art camp the boy had joined for the summer. In the evenings, he joined them for dinner, cooking simple meals in the small kitchen of Emma's rented apartment overlooking the harbor. The first time she saw him standing there, sleeves rolled up, cutting vegetables with the kind of concentration that once belonged only to business deals, she had to look away. There was something disarming about seeing him like that, so domestic, so human, as though the man she once loved had finally learned how to exist outside the walls of his empire. Noah, oblivious to the complexity surrounding him, had accepted Liam into his world with the unfiltered trust of a child. To him, Liam was just a kind man who told funny stories and always had time to play. He didn't understand yet what connected them, and Emma hadn't found the courage to tell him. Every time she looked at Liam and their son together, she knew the truth was waiting, inevitable, but she also knew she needed more time. The boy adored Liam already. What would it do to him to learn that the man he saw as a new friend was actually the father who hadn't been there when he was born? She feared the confusion, the pain, the questions she might not know how to answer. Liam, for his part, never pushed. He didn't demand recognition, didn't correct Noah when he called him Mr. Liam. He was content to be what Emma allowed him to be, though each time the boy ran into his arms, a small part of him ached with the wish to hear one word, Dad. Sometimes, late at night, when he was alone, he would replay those moments over in his mind, the way Noah laughed, the way his small hand fit into his, and he would whisper the word to himself quietly, afraid to give it voice in the daylight. One evening, after a long day by the shore, they sat on the balcony together, watching the last of the light fade. Noah had fallen asleep early, exhausted from swimming. The air smelled of salt and jasmine, and the sound of waves rose and fell like a heartbeat. Emma sipped her tea, her eyes distant. "He's growing so fast," she said softly. "Sometimes I wish I could slow it down." Liam nodded. "You've done an incredible job with him." She smiled faintly, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "I did my best. Some days I felt like I was failing, though. There were nights when I didn't think I'd make it." He turned toward her. "You did more than make it, Emma. You gave him everything." She looked at him then, her blue eyes full of quiet sorrow. "And what about you, Liam? What do you think you gave him?" The question hit him like a blade. He wanted to answer, but words failed. He looked down, his jaw tightening. "I gave him absence," he said finally, the words rough and low. "And I hate myself for it every day." Silence settled between them, heavy and raw. Emma studied him for a long moment. There was no arrogance in him anymore, none of the cold detachment she remembered. He looked tired, older, and yet there was something peaceful about him now, as if he had finally stopped running from himself. "People make mistakes," she said eventually, her voice trembling. "But some mistakes are bigger than others." "I know," he replied quietly. "And I know I can't undo it. But I don't want to be another regret in your life, Emma. I want to be something good, for you, for him." Her eyes softened, though she said nothing. The wind played with her hair, and for a moment, he wanted to reach out and touch her, to feel the warmth of her skin, but he didn't. He simply watched her, memorizing the curve of her face, the sadness and strength that coexisted in her expression. The next day brought a change neither of them expected. Emma received a call from one of her clients, a large design firm in another city, offering her a contract that could secure her business for years. It was the opportunity she had dreamed of, but it came with a condition: she would have to move. When she hung up the phone, she felt both elated and terrified. She wanted to tell Liam, but a part of her dreaded his reaction. Would he let them go? Would he try to stop her? That evening, when he came by, she told him. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. It's an amazing opportunity, she said carefully. It's what I've been working toward. He nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, he said. You're not angry? She asked. Angry? He gave a small, hollow laugh. Emma, I have no right to be angry. You've built a life from nothing, and now you have the chance to make it even better. I'd be a fool to stand in your way. She studied him, trying to understand his calmness. What about Noah? She asked softly. You've just started being in his life. He looked at her then, his voice low and steady. That's why I'm not letting you leave without a fight. Her eyes widened. Liam. Not that kind of fight, he interrupted. I mean, I'll go wherever you go. If you'll let me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emma's heart pounded. For a moment, she saw the man she had fallen in love with years ago, but stripped of his pride and power, replaced by a kind of raw honesty that scared her more than his arrogance ever had. You'd leave your company? She asked quietly. He nodded. I've spent my whole life building things that didn't matter. This, he gestured toward the sleeping boy in the next room, this matters. You matter. I can run a business from anywhere, Emma. But I can't live without my family anymore. The word family slipped from his mouth so naturally that she froze. He didn't even seem to realize he'd said it. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, You think we can just become that again? After everything? No, he said softly. I think we can build something new. The conversation ended there, but the echo of his words followed her long after he left. That night, Emma sat by Noah's bed, watching him sleep. His small chest rose and fell in the quiet rhythm of dreams, his hand curled around his stuffed toy. She thought about Liam's offer, about the life she had built, about the years she had spent convincing herself that love was a weakness she couldn't afford. But as she looked at her son's peaceful face, she realized something she hadn't dared admit before: she was tired of being afraid. Across the water, Liam stood on the deck of his yacht, the stars reflecting in the dark waves below. He could still see the light from her window, faint and warm against the night. He wanted to believe that she was thinking of him, even if just for a moment. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more walls to break down, more wounds to heal. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about what he had to lose. He was thinking about what he could finally gain, a life not defined by success, but by love. He whispered her name into the wind, a silent promise carried across the water. And though he didn't know what tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he wasn't going to let the chance slip away again. This time, he would fight, not for control, not for redemption, but for the two souls who had already forgiven him without even realizing it. The morning of their departure arrived under a sky streaked with soft pink and gold, the kind of dawn that seemed to hold its breath before the world stirred awake. Emma stood by the window of her apartment, watching the sunlight stretch across the sea. Boxes lined the walls, each one filled with the fragments of a life she had built from nothing. The contract was signed, the tickets were booked, and the future she had worked so hard for was finally within reach. Yet as she looked out over the harbor, her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear, exactly, and it wasn't regret. It was the weight of uncertainty, the quiet ache that comes from knowing you're leaving something behind that might never come again. Noah was still asleep in his room, clutching his toy airplane, unaware that today would change everything. When Liam arrived, he looked different somehow, less polished, less like the man who used to stride through life with unshakable confidence. He was wearing a simple white shirt, his dark hair still damp from the shower, his blue eyes unreadable. He stepped inside quietly, his gaze sweeping over the half-empty apartment before landing on her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Finally, he said, "So this is it." Emma turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is it." He nodded slowly, shoving his hands into his pockets, as if he needed something to hold on to. "I meant what I said, Emma. I'll come with you if you'll have me." She looked at him, her heart aching at the sincerity in his voice. There had been a time when she would have given anything to hear those words, but now they terrified her. "You can't just throw everything away," she said quietly. "Your company, your life, you're my life," he interrupted, his tone steady but soft. "I just didn't realize it soon enough." She wanted to believe him, but doubt still lingered like a shadow. "You say that now, but what happens when things get hard? When you remember who you are, what you left behind?" He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I'll remember what I almost lost. You think I'm the same man who walked away from you 5 years ago, but I'm not. I've spent every day since trying to fill a hole that nothing could fill. I thought success would make me whole, but it only made me empty. You and Noah," his voice broke slightly, "you're the only things that ever made me feel human." Emma looked away, blinking back tears. She had told herself for years that he would never change, that the man she once loved had died the day he turned his back on her. But now, standing before her, he looked like someone reborn from his own mistakes. Still, forgiveness wasn't simple. "You hurt me, Liam," she said quietly. "You hurt both of us, even if Noah doesn't know it yet. I don't know if I can ever forget that." He nodded, his expression heavy with understanding. "I don't want you to forget," he said. "I just want the chance to show you that I can be different." Before she could answer, a small voice interrupted them. "Are we going, Mommy?" Noah stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, his little backpack slung over one shoulder. Emma smiled gently. "Yes, baby. We're leaving soon." Liam crouched down to his level, smiling faintly. "Hey, champ. You ready for your big adventure?" Noah grinned. "Yep. Will you come too?" The question caught both adults off guard. Liam blinked, his throat tightening. "Only if it's okay with your mom," he said quietly. Emma's eyes met his, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. She saw not the man who had abandoned her, but the one who had stayed when he didn't have to. The day stretched long and slow. They drove to the harbor together, the wind whipping through their hair as the city disappeared behind them. Emma sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the waves, while Noah sang softly in the back seat. Every now and then, she'd glance at Liam, catching the way he looked at their son in the rearview mirror, his expression filled with awe and quiet love. It was still strange, seeing him this way, unguarded, vulnerable, almost gentle. She had spent years imagining what it would be like if he ever came back, but this was something she hadn't expected, not a man demanding forgiveness, but one willing to earn it inch by inch. When they reached the marina, the boat that would take them to their new home was waiting. The sky had clouded over, a low rumble of thunder echoing in the distance. As they loaded the last of their bags, Emma felt the first drops of rain on her skin. She looked up, watching as the storm began to roll in. It felt fitting somehow, that the moment they were about to leave the past behind, the sky itself seemed to demand a reckoning. Liam turned to her then, his hair damp from the rain, his eyes burning with something that felt like desperation. "Emma," he said, his voice low, "if I let you go now, I don't think I'll ever forgive myself." She froze, her heart pounding. "And if I let you come with me," she whispered, "I don't know if I'll survive it." They stood there in the rain, the world around them blurred into a haze of gray and silver. Then, without thinking, Liam reached for her hand. It was a simple touch, tentative but firm, and she didn't pull away. For the first time in years, she let herself feel everything she had buried, the anger, the longing, the love that had refused to die no matter how much she tried to kill it. Tears mixed with rain as she whispered, "You don't get to break me again." "I won't," he said. "Not ever." Something in his tone made her believe him. She closed her eyes, letting the storm wash over them, cleansing, raw, real. When she opened them again, he was still there, still holding her hand, still looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She exhaled shakily. "Then don't let go." They boarded the boat together, Noah clutching both their hands. As the vessel pulled away from the dock, the city grew smaller behind them, the rain easing into a soft drizzle. Emma stood at the railing, watching the horizon, the air heavy with salt and promise. Liam stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. Neither spoke for a long time, but the silence wasn't empty, it was full of understanding, of everything that didn't need words anymore. Noah tugged on Liam's sleeve. "Can I call you Dad now?" he asked innocently. Liam's breath caught, his eyes widening as he looked down at the boy. Emma turned too, her heart twisting. For a moment, Liam couldn't speak. Then he knelt, pulling Noah gently into his arms. "Yeah," he said, his voice breaking. "Yeah, you can." The boy grinned, wrapping his arms around Liam's neck. Emma watched them, tears filling her eyes. The pain of the past didn't vanish, but it no longer defined them. It had become something else, something that had forged them into who they were now. As the boat carried them toward a new city, a new life, Emma felt a quiet peace settle in her chest. She looked at Liam, and he looked back, and for the first time since that terrible day 5 years ago, she saw not the man who had turned away, but the one who had finally come home. The sun broke through the clouds then, scattering light across the water, and in that moment, she knew they had found what they had both been searching for all along, not perfection, not redemption, but the courage to begin again.